Habakkuk's world is a mess, and it's hard to know where to place the blame. Maybe the kings who neglected the poor, or the empires whose spirit of aggression is not right within them, or even the ordinary citizens who neglect their own responsibility to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. Habakkuk names all of these characters in his little 3-chapter book, but most of his complaint is directed directly at the Lord. He stations himself on the ramparts and waits, not for the next political candidate to come and clean things up, not for the sound of gunfire approaching on his city streets, not for the elites to come and organize the next Israel improvement program. He stations himself on the ramparts to wait for the very voice of God, who has yet to answer his complaint, who has yet to let him know what else there is to work for, what else there is to pray for, what else there is to hope for, when prayers and hopes and work have led only to a world on the brink of collapse. Habakkuk takes his complaint directly to God. And you got to give him some credit, because most of us do not dare ask God these kinds of questions. We do not dare insinuate that God might be involved in the violent messes of our time. We do not dare suggest that God might be apathetic in the face of injustice on the one hand, or powerless to stop it on the other. It's easier to believe that God doesn't deal in our politics, that God doesn't do much of anything except make us feel better when someone dies or gets depressed. But as our nation continues to flirt with a racialized nationalism, our city continues to leech residents in the face of poverty and crime that goes unaddressed at its roots, our church community continues to stagger from the accumulation of 2.5 years of pandemic pain. Our hearts continue to break with so much grief. It's hard not to hear the voice of the prophet. "Oh Lord, how long shall I cry for help and you will not listen? Or cry to you violence and you will not save?" Because it doesn't really feel like God is listening to the cries of so many people in our time who are hoping and praying and sometimes fighting for the just world that we've been told God wants to see. I don't really know if Habakkuk really thought he would actually get an answer to his questions. Maybe he fired off his complaints out of frustration. Despair can only be held inside for so long before it begins to hollow you out. Maybe he whispered his complaint in his nightly prayers, held it deep inside, where he believed such thoughts would be safe from the ears of others, from God, or maybe even from himself. Or maybe Habakkuk never even spoke these words at all. Maybe they emerged in the safety of his dreams, where unspeakable thoughts come out at night to breathe the air they need to stay alive. But Habakkuk got an answer in his time. Write the vision. Write the vision. And it's not the answer that I had hoped for. It doesn't even answer Habakkuk's questions. How long shall I cry for help? Write the vision. Why won't you save? Write the vision. Why do you make me see wrongdoing? Write the vision. Write the vision. It's not the vision I had hoped for in these pandemic hangover times. How can I write the vision of God's peace-filled justice when the narratives that I see on my screens and the logic that is played out on our city streets views peace as a weakness and the way of the gun as strength? How can I write the vision of God's justice when fewer and fewer people seem interested in anything other than filling their own coffers, living their own lives, doing their own thing off the grids of our shared hopes and dreams? How can I write the vision when the places where people gather to talk about vision have shrunk down to near nothing as everything gets commodified and people seem to prefer life in their own social media bubbles? How can I write the vision when the vision casters seem tired? And I'm tired too. You know, I stopped believing that God was a far-off being many years ago, sitting on a cloud somewhere looking down. And yet I confess in recent years, I've still hoped for a pre-modern style divine intervention. You know, a God who comes to smite this or that leader whose brazen oppression is so shocking that you think to yourself, if God doesn't stop this, surely there must be no God. I wanted God to reach down from some celestial place in the sky and make things magically right. I wanted God to flip some magical switch and stop the violence in our streets, mute all the voices of hate, remove all those who prey on the poor, the weak, the suffering from here to Moscow. I wanted God to heal the broken body of my friend. And there is still a part of me deep down that longs for that kind of immediate, decisive justice, that supernatural intervention, and I still allow myself sometimes to pray for it. But like Habakkuk, we don't get an answer to that prayer. All we get is a promise. There is still a vision for the appointed time. Though people shoot each other in our streets, there is still a vision of God's peace. Though too many have died too early in our compassionate calculus of things, there is still a vision for a kind of healing that puts an end to this kind of loss. Though the forces of oppression work hard to set back the clocks in our times, there is still a vision for another way. And maybe the mistake that we keep making over and over again is believing that everything can be fixed with the flip of a switch, or the pull of a trigger, or the change of a regime, believing that evil can be wiped from the face of the earth if only we detain the right criminals, if only we discover the right medicines, if only we kill the right people. Believing that peace can be won like spoil from a victory. Habakkuk learns that God's peace and justice can never be won like that. They can only be cultivated by people who trust that their small, persistent, consistent communal efforts will bear fruit over time. That is why he must write this vision of hope before he can see anything like it before him. It's really hard to live with that kind of faith. Believing in a city of peace before we've seen it. Believing in a nation of people who work for the common good in a time where so many are trying to impose their narrow ways on everyone else. Believing in a world of shared concern and justice when some dictator in another place can just decide on his own to start a war for no good reason. But that is the faith that we are called to. It is the faith that we've been given to sustain us in these difficult days. And while it is a bummer to learn that when you pray for God's intervention, what you are likely to get back is an assignment, I think that is all the more reason that we've got to learn how to celebrate together in these troubled times, to celebrate what we can do together, to celebrate new immigrants we can walk alongside, learn from, and welcome, to celebrate how we grow in our welcome of anyone whose difference has excluded them from the community in the past, to celebrate love and laughter and agency, the ability to create and love and share in our midst, to celebrate the beauty and the joy and the gift that life is, so we don't lose its wonder. Its wonder. I think people who are hooked on God's dreams for themselves and their neighborhood, what we need is the sustenance to keep writing that vision, keep speaking it, keep preaching it, keep practicing it, keep singing it, keep holding it precisely when our own grief, our own despair, our own anxiety about the future threatens to shut us down. Friends, that kind of sustenance is what the church is for. I know that many of the theologians I studied in seminary said, no, church isn't about us, it's about God. And that's true. But you see, God is about us, all of us. Our neighborhoods, our city, our nation, our world, the God of grace and love and justice and compassion who has given us a faith to nurture our hope in troubled times. In fact, when you get to the end of the book of Habakkuk, you realize that the whole book, the entire book is liturgy. That's the stuff that we do in worship. The book ends with these words, to the leader with stringed instruments. It's liturgy. It's what we do in worship. All of our anger, all of it, all of our fears, all of our trust, all of our dreams in the future brought together in the assembly of the people. For Habakkuk, the liturgy begins with complaint, and it ends in confidence that we can live lives of hope together. As hard as it is to believe in that possibility sometimes, the community is hungry for it. The world is hungry for it. I'm hungry for it. Hungering to believe